The moment my daughter-in-law stood up at Christmas dinner and said she was taking control of everything, my own son did not look at me even once. I remember the exact second it happened because the air in the room changed. Not loudly, not dramatically. It simply went still, like the pause before something breaks. We were sitting in Daniel's house in a quiet neighborhood outside Detroit, the kind with trimmed lawns and matching mailboxes. Snow pressed softly against the windows. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon candles filled the room. It should have felt warm. It should have felt safe. It did not. My name is Evelyn Brooks. I am 69 years old. And that night, dressed in a dark blue wool sweater I had owned for years, I sat at the long dining table watching my family celebrate something I did not yet understand. Lauren, my daughter-in-law, pushed her chair back and stood up. She was glowing in a way that drew attention instantly. 5 months pregnant, perfect hair, perfect smile. One hand resting on her belly like a symbol of authority. She lifted her glass gently and tapped it with a spoon. The soft clink silenced the room. Daniel, my son, looked up at her with admiration, the kind that used to be reserved for me when he was little. The conversation stopped. Even the kids sensed it and froze mid-movement. "I just want to say something before we eat," Lauren said, her voice calm, confident, practiced. "This Christmas is special. We're not just celebrating the holidays. We're celebrating a new chapter." She paused, letting the words settle. With a baby on the way, Daniel and I have had a lot of serious conversations about responsibility, about structure, about stability. My stomach tightened. "That's why we made a decision," she continued. "Starting today, I'll be managing all the finances for this family." A murmur of approval moved through the table. "That makes sense," someone said. "She's organized," another added. Lauren smiled and then turned her eyes toward me. Not warmly, not kindly, assessing, measuring. "Evelyn," she said, using my first name, the way people do when they want to sound gentle but are not. "This morning, we had your credit card canceled. It's really for the best. At your age, you shouldn't have to worry about money anymore." The words hit the table harder than any fist ever could. She kept smiling. "If you need anything, of course, you can just ask Daniel." My son nodded, slowly, as if this were all reasonable. Around us, glasses lifted. Someone laughed awkwardly. Someone said, "Honestly, that's smart. Older people get taken advantage of." I looked at my hands. They were steady. That surprised me. For a moment, I thought I might cry, or shout, or stand up and leave. But none of that happened. Something colder and clearer settled inside my chest. I lifted my glass. I took a small sip, then I placed it back on the table. The sound was quiet, but it carried. I stood up slowly. Every joint reminded me of my age, but I stood straight. I looked directly at my son, at the boy I raised alone in Detroit after his father died. The boy who once slept beside the sound of machines and promised me he would always protect me. I smiled. "Daniel," I said softly, "you really don't know, do you?" His smile vanished. The room went silent again. This time, no one spoke. Lauren frowned, confused, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "Know what?" Daniel asked. I didn't answer. Because to understand why that question froze the room, you have to know who I really am. And to know that, you have to go back to a winter in Detroit almost 4 decades ago, when I had nothing but debt, grief, and a decision that would change everything. And that was only the beginning. 38 years before that Christmas night, I was not sitting at a polished dining table surrounded by family. I was standing alone in a freezing hospital hallway on the east side of Detroit, holding a paper cup of coffee I never drank, listening to a doctor explain that my husband was not coming back. His name was Robert Brooks. He worked nights at a steel processing plant just outside the city. Long shifts, dangerous machines, honest work. That winter, a mechanical failure crushed his lower body before anyone could shut the system down. He died before the ambulance arrived. I was 7 months pregnant. I remember walking out of the hospital into the snow without a coat because I had forgotten it inside the room where his body lay. I remember thinking that if I stopped moving, I might not start again. So I walked. 1 block, then another, until my legs gave out and I sat on a frozen bus bench and pressed my hands against my stomach. I don't know how, I whispered to the child inside me, but I'm going to keep you alive. 2 weeks later, the bills arrived. Medical expenses, funeral costs, a notice from the bank reminding me that Robert had co-signed a loan for equipment we could no longer afford. Another letter warning that if the payments were not made, our small rented house would be seized as collateral for outstanding debt. I was 29 years old. I had no college degree, no savings, no parents left to help me. All I had was a battered toolbox Robert kept in the garage and a skill most people never noticed. I knew machines. Before I met Robert, I worked repairing industrial sewing machines for small garment shops, old equipment, rusted gears, belts that snapped without warning. It was not glamorous work, but I was good at it. I understood how systems failed and how to make them work again. When Daniel was born, I brought him home to a house with heat that barely worked and cupboards that echoed when I closed them. I slept in 2-hour stretches, waking to feed him, then working late into the night repairing machines for cash. I charged less than I should have. I accepted delayed payments. I said yes too often. There were nights I cried silently while rocking Daniel with one hand and tightening bolts with the other. Nights when I wondered if loving him was selfish because I could not give him more. But somewhere in that exhaustion, something hardened inside me. I stopped thinking about survival in weeks. I started thinking in years. I learned which shop owners paid on time. I learned which neighborhoods were quietly growing and which were being abandoned. I learned how to read contracts, how to ask questions without sounding desperate, how to wait. People saw a widow with grease under her nails and a baby on her hip. They did not see someone paying attention. By the time Daniel turned 3, I was no longer just fixing machines. I was buying broken ones, repairing them, and leasing them back to small warehouses that could not afford new equipment. It wasn't luck. It was patience. And while the city around me struggled, while buildings emptied and factories closed, I was learning something no one ever taught me. The people who survive are not always the loudest. Sometimes they are the ones who build quietly while everyone else is looking the other way. And I was just getting started. By the time Daniel started kindergarten, I understood something most people never do until it is too late. Money does not come from working harder forever. It comes from learning where effort ends and systems begin. Detroit was changing. Factories were closing. Warehouses were being abandoned. Entire blocks were left to rot while people ran toward newer cities, chasing promises that never quite arrived. Everyone saw decay. I saw opportunity. I did not rush. I watched. The first real turning point came from a man named Harold Whitman, a retired logistics manager who owned 3 small storage buildings near the river. I met him because one of his loading machines broke down and no one else wanted to touch it. The job took me 12 hours and 3 skinned knuckles. When I finished, he watched me wipe grease from my hands and said something I never forgot. "You don't just fix things," he said. "You understand how they work." Harold started asking questions. I answered carefully. He explained how leasing space worked, how depreciation could be used strategically, how buying neglected property at the right moment mattered more than buying perfect property at the wrong time. He never gave me money. He gave me knowledge. My first purchase was a narrow industrial unit most people considered useless. The roof leaked. The doors barely closed. I bought it cheap using a private loan I negotiated myself. I repaired it slowly, evenings and weekends, sometimes with Daniel asleep on a cot nearby. Then I rented it to a small distributor who paid reliably and asked few questions. That rent paid the loan. The next unit came easier. I never told Daniel, not because I was ashamed, but because I was deliberate. I wanted him to grow up thinking success came from effort, not inheritance. I wanted him to study hard, to earn his place, to respect money instead of expecting it. So when he asked why we still lived simply, I told him the truth I chose. "This is enough," I said, and enough is powerful. As the years passed, my name appeared quietly on deeds no one noticed. Storage units, light industrial spaces, properties everyone else avoided because they were not shiny. I did not chase trends. I chased consistency. By the time Daniel was in high school, I had enough passive income to stop working entirely. I did not. I kept repairing machines. I kept wearing old sweaters. I kept driving the same car. Silence became my shield. When Daniel received his college acceptance letter, he believed he had earned a scholarship. I paid the tuition through accounts he never saw. When he bought his first used car, I made the final payment through a trust I controlled quietly. He thanked me for helping with groceries. I thanked him for being responsible. People around us thought I was careful, frugal, slightly stubborn. Lauren would later call it outdated. But silence does something powerful. It filters people. It shows you who respects you without knowing what you are worth, and who does not. By the time Daniel met Lauren, I owned multiple industrial properties, generating steady income. I had investments spread carefully, conservatively, invisibly. My finances were reviewed quarterly by professionals who respected discretion. To the outside world, I was still Evelyn Brooks, a widow, a repairwoman, a woman who lived simply because she had to. That was the story everyone believed. And that story was the very thing that allowed someone else to think they could take control of my life without asking. I did not realize it then, but the silence that once protected my son would soon become the weapon used against me. And Lauren was about to discover that mistaking quiet for weakness is the most expensive error a person can make. I met Lauren for the first time on a Sunday afternoon in early fall. Daniel arrived with a smile I had not seen since he was a boy, the kind that lifted his whole face and made him look younger. When she stepped into my living room, I understood immediately why he was taken with her. Lauren was polished. Every detail was intentional. Her posture, her voice, even the way she laughed just a second after everyone else, as if she needed to measure the room before responding. She wore a fitted coat, expensive boots, and carried herself like someone used to being admired. "Mrs. Brooks," she said warmly, extending her hand. "It's so nice to finally meet you." Her handshake was brief, firm, professional. Her eyes moved quickly, though. They swept across my furniture, the worn armchair, the shelves lined with old manuals and family photos. She smiled the entire time, but her gaze never stopped evaluating. That was the first thing that unsettled me. Over dinner, she spoke easily about her work, project coordination, strategic planning, deadlines, pressure. She used confident language, but when I asked gentle follow-up questions, the details blurred. "Oh, you know," she said lightly, "a little bit of everything." Daniel didn't notice. He was watching her the way people watch something they're afraid to lose. I noticed everything. In the weeks that followed, Lauren became a regular presence. She invited Daniel to expensive restaurants, encouraged him to dress differently, talked about image, about growth, about how important it was to look successful before you became successful. At first, I told myself it was none of my business. My son was an adult. He had chosen her. But patterns reveal themselves if you wait. Lauren never offered specifics about her past. Her family stories changed depending on the audience. Sometimes they were well connected. Sometimes they were distant. Sometimes they were complicated. She spoke of money casually but avoided conversations about saving. She paid with credit cards that changed frequently. One evening, after they left, I sat alone in my living room longer than usual. Something felt wrong, not because Lauren was ambitious, but because her ambition felt hollow, directionless, desperate. So I did what I had learned to do long ago. I verified. I asked a professional acquaintance to quietly look into public records. Nothing illegal, nothing invasive, just the truth that paper never hides well. What came back was not criminal. It was fragile. Lauren's income was modest. Her debts were not. Multiple credit lines, late payments, a past eviction resolved quietly, a family history marked by financial collapse and silence. She was not evil. She was afraid. And afraid people calculate. I could have told Daniel then. I could have shown him the facts and shattered the illusion before it grew roots. But I imagined his face if I did. The way he would look at me. Not as a mother protecting him, but as an obstacle. So I chose silence again. I told myself that love might soften her, that stability might calm her hunger, that once she felt secure, she would stop reaching. I underestimated what fear does to people who believe money is the only thing standing between them and humiliation. After they married, the shift was subtle at first. Lauren began asking questions that sounded caring. Does your mom have a plan for the future? Is she comfortable managing things on her own? Do you ever worry she might get taken advantage of? Daniel came to me with concern in his eyes, repeating words that were not his. And Lauren watched. She never confronted me directly. She didn't need to. She was mapping influence, studying where authority lived, learning how to step into it without appearing to push. By the time she became pregnant, her tone had changed completely. She no longer asked questions. She made statements. And somewhere between her fear and her ambition, she decided something dangerous. That I was no longer a person. I was a problem to be managed. And she was very confident she had already solved it. The takeover did not happen all at once. If it had, I might have seen it clearly. I might have stopped it sooner. But Lauren was patient. And patience can be far more dangerous than aggression. It began with concern. Daniel started calling less. Not dramatically less. Just enough that our Sunday lunches became every other week, then once a month. When I asked, he sounded apologetic. Lauren's been tired, he said. The pregnancy's been harder than expected. I understood that. Or I wanted to. Then came the suggestions. Mom, Lauren thinks it might be safer if I helped you organize your paperwork, just in case something happens. Nothing happened. I was healthy, independent, still working by choice. But the way he said it made it sound like refusing would be irresponsible. I declined gently. Lauren smiled thinner after that. Next came the visits that felt like inspections. She would glance at my mail on the counter, ask casual questions about bills, comment on the neighborhood. Are you sure you feel safe here at night? She asked once. Detroit's changing. I had lived through Detroit changing more times than she could imagine. Then the narrative shifted. Daniel began repeating phrases I had never used. At your age. Long-term planning. Risk exposure. One afternoon, he arrived with printed articles. Scams targeting seniors. Financial abuse warnings. All highlighted. Lauren just worries about you, he said. She reads a lot. The first real boundary fell when they asked me to sign limited authorization so Daniel could help with banking in emergencies. I refused. Lauren didn't argue. She waited. Weeks later, Daniel called me sounding strained. Mom, I don't want to fight about this, but Lauren's really stressed. She's scared about the baby. She thinks if something happens to you and no one has access, it could cause problems for us. For us. That phrase told me everything. The day my credit card stopped working, I was standing in line at a grocery store. I had chosen simple things: bread, soup, apples, nothing extravagant. When the cashier handed it back and said it was declined, I felt a quiet humiliation rise up my spine. I paid with cash and went home. At the bank, the clerk spoke gently. The authorized contact requested cancellation. It's a protective measure. Who authorized it? I asked. She gave me Daniel's name. I called him immediately. Mom, please don't be upset, he said quickly. Lauren found some articles about fraud. We thought it would be safer. We thought. You canceled my card without telling me. We were going to explain. When? Silence. That night, I sat alone in my living room and felt something shift. Not anger, clarity. Lauren was no longer hiding her intentions. At the next family gathering, I noticed the change fully. I was given a different plate, less food, a chipped mug while others drank from matching sets. Small things, intentional things. Lauren spoke to me slowly, loudly, as if I were fragile. Corrected me when I remembered dates she said I was mistaken about. Smiled when others nodded. Daniel watched, uncertain, conflicted, but silent. That silence hurt more than anything Lauren did. When Lauren suggested that my house might be too much responsibility now, and mentioned how nice it would be if Daniel handled things going forward, I understood the end game. Control. She wasn't trying to steal loudly. She was trying to inherit early, to turn me into someone who needed permission to live. And the cruelest part was how reasonable it all sounded to everyone else. I went home that night and opened the safe I had not touched in years. Inside were deeds, statements, contracts, the life I built quietly while others underestimated me. I sat there for a long time, looking at the proof of who I really was. Then I made a decision. If Lauren wanted control, I would let her believe she had it. Because nothing exposes character faster than power handed too easily. And Christmas was coming. Christmas returned like a stage already built, waiting for the final act. Daniel's house was louder this time. More relatives, more laughter, more noise to drown out anything uncomfortable. The table was longer. The plates matched. The candles were new. Lauren had planned everything down to the napkin folds. Control had become her language. I arrived carrying a simple dessert. Lauren took it from my hands without looking at me and placed it somewhere behind the counter. She offered me a seat at the far end of the table and a glass of non-alcoholic cider. Better for you, she said. I smiled and thanked her. Dinner passed in fragments. Conversations that skipped over me. Laughter that never landed in my direction. Daniel sat beside Lauren, tense, trying to be present and absent at the same time. I watched him carefully. My son, my blind spot. Then Lauren stood. She tapped her glass gently, the same way she had practiced before. The sound cut through the room. I just want to take a moment, she said, because with the baby coming, it's important. We're all aligned. She placed a hand on her stomach. The room softened. Daniel and I have decided it's time to be proactive about family finances, to reduce risk, to create structure. She turned toward me. That's why, starting today, I'll be managing everything. Evelyn won't need to worry anymore. She smiled wider. We already took the first step this morning by canceling her remaining access cards. It's for her protection. The room responded exactly as she expected. Nods, approval, relief. Someone said, that's responsible. Another added, it's about time someone stepped up. Daniel looked at me, uncertain, waiting for my reaction. I set my glass down. The sound was small, but it landed. I stood slowly. My knees complained. I ignored them. I looked directly at my son. Daniel, I said softly, you really don't know, do you? The room stilled. Lauren frowned. No what? I didn't answer her. I reached into my purse and took out my phone. Edward, I said calmly when the line connected, you can come in now. Confusion rippled through the room. Who's Edward? Lauren asked sharply. My attorney, I replied. Daniel's face drained of color. Mom, what are you doing? The doorbell rang before I could answer. Edward Collins stepped inside carrying a leather case worn smooth by time. Gray hair, steady eyes, the kind of man who speaks only when facts are present. Good evening, he said politely. I represent Evelyn Brooks. He placed the case on the dining table and opened it. Paper filled the space. Deeds, statements, appraisals, contracts, organized, precise. The silence thickened. Edward spoke clearly. Mrs. Brooks owns 6 industrial properties within Detroit city limits, 2 logistics facilities, 3 light manufacturing units, 1 commercial storage complex. Lauren laughed, sharp and brittle. That's impossible. Edward slid a document toward Daniel. Current combined valuation exceeds $7 million. Daniel stared at the paper. His hands began to shake. Edward continued. Monthly passive income averages over $300,000. All documented. All compliant. Lauren stepped back, as if the table had bitten her. This is a joke, she said. You lied. I met her eyes. I never told you anything at all. Edward placed another file down. Additionally, Mrs. Brooks holds diversified investments and liquid reserves. She requires no financial management. Daniel looked up at me, eyes wide. Mom, why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to become who you are without my money shaping you, I said quietly. And because I never imagined you would help someone try to erase me. Lauren's voice rose. You let us struggle. You watched us drown. I shook my head. I watched my son live honestly. You watched opportunity. Edward cleared his throat one final time. And for clarity, Mrs. Brooks's accounts were accessed without legal authority. Those actions will be reversed immediately. The room felt smaller, heavier. Lauren said nothing. She couldn't. Because the power she thought she had taken never belonged to her. And in that moment, everyone finally understood who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table all along. Power does not leave quietly when it realizes it was never real. Lauren was the first to move. Not toward me, but toward Daniel. She reached for his arm as if claiming territory, her voice shifting from disbelief to urgency in a single breath. This isn't what it looks like, she said. She manipulated the situation. She hid things from you for decades. How is that not control? Daniel pulled his arm back. Slowly, deliberately. That movement hurt her more than any accusation. You canceled my mother's card, he said. His voice was low, unsteady. You made decisions about her life without asking her. Lauren's eyes filled, but the tears felt rehearsed. I was protecting our family, our baby. I stepped forward then, not to confront her, but to stand beside my son. Protection doesn't require humiliation, I said, and care never begins by taking away someone's dignity. Lauren's face hardened. The softness dropped. So what now? She snapped. You win. You take him back. You take everything. Daniel looked at me. For the first time that night, really looked. Not as a son seeking permission, but as a man facing truth. I need space, he said to Lauren. I need to think without being pushed. Her voice sharpened. If you walk away right now, don't expect me to make this easy. I'll fight. For the house. For support. For everything. Silence. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just nodded once. Then we'll handle it the right way. Lauren laughed bitterly. Your mother taught you well. I met her gaze. No. Life did. She grabbed her coat and left without another word. The door closed behind her with a sound that echoed longer than it should have. The family dispersed quietly after that. Apologies mumbled, eyes averted. No one stayed long enough to ask questions they didn't want answered. When the house was finally empty, Daniel sat down heavily, his hands covering his face. "I didn't see it," he said. "I let her turn me into someone I don't recognize." I sat beside him. "You saw what you wanted to believe. That doesn't make you weak, it makes you human." He looked up, eyes red. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, "you decide who you are when comfort is gone." The days that followed were not dramatic. They were quiet, heavy. Daniel stayed with me for a while, sleeping in the room he grew up in. He went to work. He came home exhausted. He thought. Lauren called, then texted, then threatened. When fear failed, anger took over. But something had shifted. Daniel no longer reacted. He listened. He asked questions. He stopped apologizing for setting boundaries. I did not interfere. This was his fight now. When he finally told her he wanted separation, his voice didn't shake. He explained it calmly. He said the word honesty more than once. The baby still mattered. That never changed. And neither did my resolve. I offered help, not control. Support, not rescue. I made it clear that I would protect my grandchild, but I would never again allow my silence to be used against me. Power had changed hands that night, not because money was revealed, but because truth was. And truth, once spoken, does not go back into hiding. What followed was not revenge. It was reconstruction. And that, I learned, takes more courage than destruction ever could. The weeks after everything came apart were quieter than I imagined. No shouting, no dramatic confrontations, just the steady sound of reality settling into place. Daniel moved forward carefully. He did not rush the separation, not because he was afraid, but because he wanted to do it right. For the baby, for himself, for the man he still hoped to become. He met with lawyers. He learned things he wished he had known earlier. About shared debt, about responsibility, about how easily love can be confused with control. Lauren fought at first, not with honesty, but with pressure, guilt, fear, threats wrapped in concern. But without Daniel's silence to protect her behavior, her power faded. She eventually agreed to mediation, not out of kindness, but because reality left her no other choice. When my grandson was born, everything shifted again. Holding him for the first time stripped the anger from the room. He was small, fragile, unaware of the chaos that had surrounded his arrival. In that moment, none of the documents mattered. None of the money. Only the responsibility we all carried for what kind of world he would grow into. That was when I made my final decision. I did not punish Lauren. I did not reward her either. I helped in a way that protected the child, not her pride. I offered to clear the debt that threatened to crush her, but only under strict conditions. Full transparency, financial counseling, therapy, not as charity, but as accountability. Some people thought I was too generous. They were wrong. I was being precise. Daniel rebuilt his life slowly. He moved into a modest place. He learned to budget again, to live without illusion, to trust his instincts without outsourcing his judgment. He became a better father because he became a more honest man. And me, I did what I had always done best. I built something quiet. I restructured my estate, not around control, but around values. I created a trust for my grandson that could not be touched for anyone's convenience. I allocated resources for Daniel with clear boundaries. Support without dependency. And with the rest, I did something no one expected. I invested it in women like the woman I once was. Widows, single mothers, women left behind by systems that never noticed their labor. I funded training, equipment, education, not handouts, foundations. Detroit taught me that survival is not about escaping hardship. It is about transforming it into something useful. Years have passed now. My grandson laughs easily. Daniel stands taller. Lauren is quieter, more real, not perfect, but honest enough to try. That is all anyone can ask. As for me, I still live simply. I still fix things. I still believe silence can be powerful, but only when it is chosen, never when it is forced. Because I learned something important at that Christmas table. Dignity does not announce itself. It waits. And when it speaks, it does not ask for permission. 5 life lessons from this story. 1. Silence can protect you, but it can also endanger you if others define it for you. 2. Never confuse control with care. They are not the same. 3. Power reveals character when it shifts hands. 4. Kindness without boundaries becomes permission. 5. True legacy is not money passed down, but values passed forward. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to reflect. What lesson did you take from it? And which city are you watching from? Like, share, and comment to support stories like this.